Hey, this is Michael Wild with Splunk. Today's demonstration is going to be on how to make meta events with Splunk. Meta events are basically an event of events. Makes it possible for me to create a linkage between events, which is often like a transaction. So in this example, this comes from the 2007 Interop show in Las Vegas. At Interop, the staff used Splunk to look at why people weren't getting IP addresses, and they used it for the DHCP logs. So if we were to take a look at some of the DHCP logs actually from Interop, so you can see for every action that a person does or a computer does, there are a number of things that can occur in trying to get an IP address. So Splunk is capturing all this information in the log files, and of course the server is actually eating it up. So we'll go ahead and take a look at this once the events are inside of Splunk, see what they look like before we create meta events, and then, of course, discuss how to create the meta events and all of that. Back over here in Splunk, we're going to quickly add an input. Just do a batch load of that static log file, directory, logs, DHCP. I'll give it a source type. I'm going to manually source type it. We'll call it DHCP. Hit add. So now Splunk is eating that up. I'll change my preferences because these are old events to all time. And Splunk is going through and processing these events. So if we go ahead and look at just the source type DHCP, we see a whole giant pile of events just like we did in the log itself. But of course, Splunk makes it really easy to whip through these events, such as highlighting a time range or drilling into a specific time range and all the things that we're used to with Splunk. For DHCP, however, the transaction idea, the meta event idea works quite well because when someone gets a DHCP address, there's always a number of things that occur, such as a discover, an offer, a request, an acknowledgement. Sometimes there's an inform or a release. So if there was a way we could see, for example, all of the events associated with a specific MAC address, for example, or a person's computer, it might be easy for us to tell whether they've succeeded or they've failed. Well, take a look at the bundle that's going to be required to create this, and then we'll see what it looks like in Splunk after it's done. Meta events, as some of you may or may not know, are an index time activity. Certain things in Splunk are done at search time, some are done at index time. So at this point in time, we're going to create meta events as they come into the index. Well, since we already put those events in our index, the first thing we're going to do is clean our index. We've already shut down Splunk. And what's going to happen is Splunk's deleting all the data in the index right now. We're going to apply our bundle. And then when Splunk gets turned back on, the bundle changes will be applied and Splunk will re-eat that file. So we've created a bundle here, put it under a directory called under opt Splunk etc bundles. And we've got this one called DHCP bundle. So DHCP bundle. Now in DHCP bundle, we've got a few files. An inputs.conf, which someone could use if they just wanted to eat up that directory, but since we've already selected that in our local bundle that's there, props.conf and transforms.conf are actually the most important ones here. So if we look at props.conf, props.conf is basically saying for the source type DHCP, we're actually going to run some regular expressions or we're going to run some transforms against it. And we're going to do it both at index time and search time. We're going to, for the source type DHCP, I'm going to extract some meta information out of it. run some transforms that will cause it to create a meta event, cause it to create some fields associated with it, and then also at report time, we're going to be extracting some fields as well, so that when you do a search, for example, at the UI, when you extract fields, they can be done there. Additionally, for field extraction to work correctly in the meta events index, I also need to run that again by selecting report interop, but this time on the meta event source type. When events go from the main index to the meta events index, they don't carry their source type over with. The source type actually gets changed to meta event. So let's look at the transforms.conf. Transforms, there we go. So in the transforms.conf file, basically we're having a few regexes run. One, I'm extracting DHCP action just as some information to be extracted at search time. But the key thing here is DHCP meta. Now, DHCP meta is going to run against any of the events that have the source type DHCP, and it's looking in the event itself for a couple of things. It's looking for the words to or from. As we can see below, we see the word to after the major DHCP command and the word from. So that's going to bring us all the way to that part. And then it's also going to look for a space and then a pattern that matches a regular expression pattern that matches the MAC address. So it's looking for not a space, colon, not a space, colon, not a space, colon, and so on and so forth. So any events that happen to match both of those are going to be put into something that we call a cluster, which is the internal Splunk word for meta event. It's going to take that and it's going to take that meta event, take the MAC address, and also put it in the cluster as well so that we can see how the events are linked. Well, I could be going on and off the network if I wanted to several times in the 1 to 2 minute period. I might have way too many events kind of linked together and they might not make too much sense. So Splunk provides me the ability to end a transaction or end a cluster. And in the DHCP world, if you get an IP address or you release your IP address, that is the end of your conversation. So we're also running DHCP meta ACK, which is just the name of my transform here, and it's looking for a regular expression that says, does it either have the words DHCP ACK or DHCP release? And if so, put that event in the cluster, take the whole event, and then add a little tag at the end that says colon, colon, end. Now, when Splunk sees colon, colon, end, the meta event process will then flush the cluster, create a new cluster, or create a new meta event for any other events that match that. So it basically is a good way for me to end my transaction should you happen to have transactions that actually have an end. Okay, we've restarted Splunk. We're back in here logged in. And of course our DHCP logs are still there as to be expected. But now if we type in index colon colon, we see meta events. If I hit enter, Splunk is then going to do a search on any event in the meta events index. In our case, it should be only ones that matched our DHCP events and should have been linked by MAC address. So as you can see here, we've got a nice pattern of events over a time range. We may decide we want to drill into that time range by just clicking and dragging. But more importantly, we have linked together the transactions. We've linked together the DHCP transaction by MAC address. So I can see, for example, this person at tweaver NC6320 had an acknowledge request, or a discover, offer, a request, and acknowledge. Versus if I was looking for that person in the log, I might see it in several entries, even in the main Splunk index. But in this case, the meta events are quite helpful. Now, additionally, with meta events, the failure of people getting IP addresses might be something that I'd want to know about. So we could go ahead and do a search that looked something like this: index meta events, let's look for a DHCP discover or an offer or a request, but not an acknowledgement and not a few other error codes such as segment wrong or unknown. So if I run that search, and it should do it within the time range that I had selected, we should see only DHCP failures. And as we can see, this username laptop, amongst a few other ones, such as NVLPT01 and Justin Laptop, continually got discover, offer, discover, offer, discover, offer. So we may decide that let's set up a search on that, run that DHCP failures, schedule that to run, for example, every 5 minutes, and send an email to myself if I'm on the show floor, for example, at Interop, to let me know when there are failures of people getting IP addresses. And it's a good place to start for tracking down a problem, because then I might go into the main index and start to look at things from that network. Maybe we look at the 45.42 network, and then try to track down the problem there as well. Pretty simple example on how we can link events together. As you can see, we've also extracted things like subnet, so I can filter by subnet, which helps the Interop folks focus on the networking technology related. So, anyways, that was a quick example of how to make meta events. Any questions, email me at thewild@splunk.com.